Let us now consider the Zodiacs from Esna, another ancient Egyptian city, also located near the Bight of the Kings on the Nile, likewise Dendera. During the French invasion of Egypt, Europeans discovered two ancient temples in Esna featuring zodiac carvings. One of the temples is very large, whereas the other one, in northern Esna, is considerably smaller, which is why the authors of the new Chronology project refer to them as the Greater and Lesser Temples of Esna. Zodiacs were found in both of the temples. Just like the ones from Dendera, they were gigantic ceiling bas-reliefs carved in stone. We shall witness many similarities between the zodiacs from Dendera and Esna. The zodiac of the Greater Temple is referred to by the authors as the Greater Zodiac of Esna, or simply the Greater Zodiac, EB in abbreviation. It was copied by Napoleonic artists quite meticulously and represented in the description of Egypt. The general tables of Egyptian symbols as seen in the part 16 of this series, make it rather easy to find all the figures of zodiacal constellations in the Greater Zodiac. For the most part, they coincide with the ones used in the zodiacs from Dendera. The only figures that need to be described separately are those of Gemini, Libra and Virgo, which appear to be quite odd in this case. The constellation of Gemini is represented by 3 figures and not the usual 2. The first of the Gemini figures is a man with a long stick in both hands which he rests upon a small animal under his feet, followed by the 2 other figures, one male and the other female, whose arms are crossed in the exact same manner. This triad looks perfectly identical in both zodiacs from Esna, standing for the constellation of Gemini in both cases. This constellation looks differently in other Egyptian zodiacs. Libra is simply drawn as a pair of scales, just the same as in the zodiacs of Dendera. The scales are held by a woman. The authors believe the female to be part of the secondary winter solstice horoscope, since it is located in the corresponding area. It is proven by the exhaustive solution for the Greater Zodiac discovered by the authors. This figure actually stands for Venus in one of the secondary zodiacs. The symbol of Virgo is drawn here in the exact same way as it is in the zodiacs from Dendera. It is the woman with an ear of wheat in her hands. But next to her, we also see a lioness with a human face, whose tail nearly touches the hands of Virgo. This figure stands apart from the constellation and must belong to the secondary horoscope of autumn equinox. The only reason we should mention this figure is that at first glance, it may be mistaken for the constellation of Leo due to its resemblance in appearance. This is how we usually see the figure of Leo drawn in Egyptian zodiacs. A woman that either stands on the lion's tail or holds onto it. However, this is not Leo, since the real constellation figure of Leo is elsewhere on the Greater Zodiac. Whereas the above-mentioned lioness with a human face does not form the Egyptian symbol of Leo in conjunction with Virgo. First of all, the leonine figure is grossly out of proportion as compared to the Egyptian drawings of Leo. The auxiliary Virgo is never bigger than the actual constellation figure in any Egyptian zodiac. One clearly sees the contrary to be the case, since the figure in question is the primary Virgo. Apart from that, the leonine figure with a human face seen next to Virgo is explicitly accompanied by a transposition symbol, since it stands on a snake. There is nothing of the kind anywhere near Virgo. This is why we have to ascribe the leonine figure to a secondary horoscope. Finally, the above is also confirmed by the exhaustive solution. There are no new characteristics pertaining to constellation figures in the Greater Zodiac of Esna. The colored version of the Greater Zodiac has all the constellation figures highlighted in red. The most of the primary horoscopes planets can be identified effortlessly. We recognize Saturn instantly. It is in Virgo, near the edge of the zodiacal strip, and looks just the same as it does in the zodiacs of Dendera, a wayfarer with a crescent on his head. All the figures carrying planetary rods are grouped into 5 groups, according to the number of planets drawn in Egyptian zodiacs, with the exception of the Sun and the Moon. 3 of the groups have a single planetary figure with a rod each, whereas the other 2 have a pair each, one figure following in steps of the other. All of these figures are highlighted yellow. This circumstance happens to be the key to the solution of the entire horoscope. The ancient concept of Mercury and Venus possessing a double nature is already known to us quite well. After all, the 2 have smaller orbits than the Earth, and are always close to the Sun as seen by a terrestrial observer. They hide behind the Sun every now and then, and appear from a different side of the luminary every time, hence their attribute of morning and evening visibility. We recognize a woman in one of the double figures carrying planetary rods. It is accompanied by a man with the head of a lion. We see no other female figures equipped with planetary rods anywhere else, which suggests that it is Venus. We see 2 other female figures sitting on stools close nearby, the left one being bigger and the right one smaller. We shall learn what they stand for soon enough. All the other similar figures sitting upon stools are male. Which is yet another indication that the planet we see here is Venus, a female planet. The second couple of rod-bearing figures is drawn as 2 males with heads of either jackals or dogs. The planet they represent is therefore Mercury. One of its representatives holds a planetary rod whilst sitting on a chair. The other one is close nearby. Both figures are located at the very edge of the zodiacal strip. Furthermore, we see a whole collection of attributes pertaining to double planets between the 2 figures. These can only relate to Venus and Mercury. Then, there are some explicitly Mercurian attributes to boot. First, 2 figures, identical in both appearance and pose. Second, a bicephalous animal. Third, 2 small animals of a kind, looking at each other. And fourth, prostrate arms of the figure sitting on the chair. The figure's head is replaced by a feather, which is another symbol of Mercury. All of the above means that Mercury was either in Aquarius, or close nearby. The other 2 planets of the primary horoscope are less conspicuous. One of the figures looks like a man holding a planetary rod in his hand and a whip on his shoulder, which we see to the right from Venus, near the edge of the zodiacal strip, and the man with a leonine head who also carries a planetary rod, to the left from the pair of sitting female figures. Since we have already identified the 2 other planets of the primary horoscope, with the exception of Jupiter and Mars, the remaining pair must represent Jupiter and Mars. We shall refrain from guesswork and consider 2 versions equally viable. Jumping ahead, the wayfarer with the whip proved to be Mars, whereas the wayfarer with a leonine head represents Jupiter. The Sun and the Moon are depicted clearly and unambiguously. We only see 2 circles here, one of them is in Taurus and has a very eloquent crescent drawn inside of it, whereas the second circle, between Aries and Pisces, is plain and simple, without any crescents. The most likely position for the Moon is therefore Taurus, and Aries for the Sun. The main solution proves this very well. Nevertheless, the authors have considered versions involving the reverse identification of the couple, less probable, where the circle with a crescent in Taurus stands for the Sun with a new moon, whereas the full moon is represented by the simple circle between Aries and Pisces. However, this identification did not provide an exhaustive solution, and was therefore shown to be incorrect. Thus, most of the primary horoscopes figures were identified already at the stage of preliminary analysis. The only cases with options being those of Mars, Jupiter and Sun-Moon. However, astronomical calculations resolved the ambiguity instantly, since there are very few preliminary solutions, about 10 of them all in all, the exhaustive solution being unique. The small number of preliminary solutions is understandable in this case. All the planetary figures of wayfarers one finds in the primary horoscope are located between Pisces and Aquarius, with the sole exception of Saturn. Furthermore, the cusp of the two constellations occupies 1/2 of the entire zodiac space, no less. Hence, most likely, we see an almost complete planetary alignment between Pisces and Aquarius. The only planet we find elsewhere on the date transcribed in the greater zodiac is Saturn. This is very good for astronomical dating, since the dates of the primary horoscope can be calculated without the need of identifying any planet separately, except for Saturn. We already know the rest to be located in either Pisces or Aquarius. The authors performed all necessary calculations, but they yielded no other exhaustive solutions, which makes this identification of all planets included in the greater zodiac's primary horoscope unequivocal. The symbolism of the greater zodiac of Esna proved to correspond with the zodiacs from Dendera in particular, and other Egyptian zodiacs in general. Nevertheless, the zodiacs from Esna possess a number of unique characteristics. Let us define planetary figures' distribution across zodiacal constellations. Saturn is the male figure with a bovine head with a crescent on its head. We see it between Virgo and Libra. The middle of Virgo was chosen as the best point for Saturn, simply because there is another figure in Virgo that resembles Saturn, its sitting double, which is the very same figure, but without the planetary rod and sitting instead of walking. Despite choosing the best point as the middle of Virgo, we find Saturn exactly on the cusp of Virgo and Libra in the final solution, where it should be for the primary figure, unlike its sitting double. Most of the primary horoscope's planets from the greater zodiac of Esna have such sitting doubles except for Mars and the Moon. The former has a double nevertheless, although a special one. It looks like a military shield with a human head upon it. It comes immediately after Mars. The double of the Moon is the tiny figure between Taurus and Aries. All the doubles are highlighted green in the colored version of the greater zodiac. The Sun is the only figure left without a double. All of these doubles are located near the primary figures of their respective planets, possibly standing for secondary horoscopes. However, they should all relate to vernal equinox in this case, excepting Saturn. However, the date of the vernal equinox shall be close to that of the primary horoscope. After all, the primary horoscope's solar figure is drawn in Aries, right next to Pisces, the constellation housing the spring equinox point of the primary horoscope. However, in this situation they offer no help in the elimination of extraneous solution since the disposition of such doubles gives us no new information to complement the primary horoscope. We will proceed with the rest of the primary horoscope's planets. Mercury, Jupiter, Venus and Mars are all shown between Aquarius and Pisces. The only acceptable order options for these planets on the ecliptic counting from Aquarius to Pisces are as follows: Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter. Or, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Mars. We find the Sun between Pisces and Taurus. We see the Moon on the back of Taurus. It is therefore either in this constellation or in Aries, since the lunar circle is drawn in between the two. The acceptable position area for the Moon must therefore cover both Aries and Taurus. A reverse interpretation option also exists, with the Sun and the Moon swapping positions. In the final solution, the Sun is on the cusp of Aries and Taurus, whereas the Moon is right in Taurus. Indicators of planetary visibility as used in the Greater Zodiac of Esna are substantially different from the ones from the Dendera zodiacs. The latter used a star over the head of a planetary figure to indicate its visibility, which isn't drawn if the planet was invisible. On the contrary, we see no symbols to indicate that a planet was visible. However, invisible planets have solar circles instead of heads, which is perfectly correct astronomically. It is the solar radiance that renders planets invisible, after all. The Sun stands between the observer and the planet, obscuring view. Each planet in the primary horoscope of the Greater Zodiac from Esna is drawn visible, with just a few planets from the secondary horoscope of autumn equinox possessing invisibility indicators. In the secondary horoscope of autumn equinox in Virgo, we see the following figures which either stand for planets or serve as additional astronomical symbols that must get some sort of explanation in the exhaustive solution. On the left of Virgo, we see a lioness with a human face with a large circle on her head. As was explained earlier, this figure bears no relation to the constellation of Virgo and therefore comes from a secondary horoscope, which is also emphasized by the autumn equinox sign that looks like a two-headed snake below. The lioness usually symbolizes Venus. The other female figure, the one that holds the scales of Libra and also stands for Venus from a secondary horoscope, the only planet of the feminine gender, must relate to the secondary horoscope of winter solstice. The area to the right of Virgo, after Libra, must therefore contain planets from another secondary horoscope, and our search should be continued in the opposite direction, towards Leo. After the Leonine Venus, we see Saturn, which makes perfect sense. The primary horoscope's Saturn is either in Libra or Virgo, and so we must find this rather slowly moving planet close nearby on the day of the autumn equinox as well. Saturn is followed by a triad of figures, one of which has a solar disk instead of a head, signifying its invisibility in solar rays. The two others should stand for planets that were visible that day. All planets are represented with male figures. The route of our further movement across the greater zodiac turns around the curved body of the goddess Nut and changes direction, making us proceed from left to right. The first thing we see here is the autumn equinox symbol that looks like two male figures with leonine heads holding hands. We are therefore still in the territory of the autumn equinox horoscope. Next, we see a symbol of Leo with an auxiliary Virgo over its tail. There is a figure of a militant-looking man above, who has raised a large knife or a sword over his head as if he were trying to kill someone, most likely Mars or Saturn. We see it above Leo and the auxiliary Virgo, which locates the planet in either Leo or Virgo. It is however possible that the figure comes from the secondary horoscope of summer solstice, since we find it at the border of two secondary horoscope. This is where the area of the autumn equinox ends. It is followed by the sign of Cancer, and further on, a collection of summer solstice symbols. We came up with the following secondary horoscope. Venus was in Virgo on the day of the autumn equinox, possibly invisible. There were three more planets in Virgo apart from Venus, one of them invisible and the other two visible. Either Mars or Saturn must be in Virgo or Leo. If not, then it must be there on the day of the summer solstice. In the secondary horoscope of winter solstice in Sagittarius, the sign of Sagittarius represents a standard astronomical hieroglyph with a minimal secondary horoscope. It marks the point of winter solstice, without providing us with any further information of any substance. Nearby, in Capricorn, we find a small male figure holding the solstice symbol in its hand. This object is a symbol of the winter solstice and not a planet. To the left from the Sagittarius, we see a collection of solstice symbols looking as snakes of different kinds. Next to them, there are two absolutely identical male figures with jackal heads. The only planet that could be drawn in this manner is Mercury, a double male planet. Next, right after Scorpio, we see a female figure holding Libra in her hand. Earlier, it was discovered that it must pertain to the secondary horoscope of the winter solstice. Thus, Venus was in Libra on solstice day. We came up with the following secondary horoscope of winter solstice. Mercury is in either Sagittarius or Scorpio, and Venus is in Libra. Let us move on to the next secondary horoscope. The secondary horoscope of spring equinox in Pisces is absent. The possible reason may be extreme proximity to the primary horoscope. Alternatively, it may be represented by the sitting doubles. However, this shall hardly help us with verifying solutions, since the doubles are but a reflection of the primary horoscope, which is satisfied in all of our preliminary solutions at any rate. The secondary horoscope of summer solstice in Gemini is all but empty. The actual figure of Gemini is an astronomical hieroglyph that incorporates the actual constellation sign as well as a minimal secondary horoscope, Venus and Mercury, represented by the female and male figure of Gemini, respectively. To the left from Gemini, we see a large number of summer solstice symbols, in between Gemini and neighboring Cancer. There is only one symbol that could stand for a planet in this secondary horoscope, namely, the bicephalous snake between Gemini and Cancer. It most likely represents Mercury, but possibly Venus as well, also a double planet. Thus, the secondary horoscope of the summer solstice is minimal: Mercury and Venus. The militant-looking figure of either Mars or Saturn over Virgo and Leo may also be part of this horoscope, but only given that it isn't involved in the autumn equinox horoscope. There is just a single exhaustive solution for the greater zodiac of Esna, obtained by Fomenko and Nosovsky, namely, March 31 to April 3, 1394 AD. It turned out that the planets of the primary horoscope are represented in the zodiac by the following symbols. The Sun is a circle in Aries. According to this solution, the Sun was at the cusp of Aries and Taurus, transcending from the former into the latter. The Moon is the circle with a crescent inside it as seen on the back of Taurus. The Moon was passing through Aries and Taurus. However, it immediately became invisible in Aries. Finally, a new moon appeared in Taurus on April 3, 1394, right in the stellar agglomeration known as the Pleiades. It enjoyed a great deal of attention in medieval astronomy due to its excellent visibility on the celestial sphere. According to the calculations performed with the aid of the astrosimulation software, the Moon remained invisible throughout the entire period between March 31 and the evening of April 3, making its first appearance as the narrow crescent of the new Moon in Pleiades and Taurus. It becomes clear why we should see a tiny female figure looking like an upright Egyptian sarcophagus of the anthropomorphic type. This figure is highlighted green in the colored version of the zodiac. Such figures represented dead people in Egyptian symbolism. They would also often be drawn standing up, which may have symbolized the ensuing resurrection. Indeed, the Moon dies to resurrect in 2 days. The sarcophagus figure also serves as the double of the Moon in the greater zodiac. As this is an Egyptian sarcophagus, it naturally cannot remain in a sitting position, the way it is with the doubles of other planets. The sarcophagus double of the Moon corresponds very well to the latter, having been dead, or invisible, reappearing in Taurus as a narrow crescent of the new Moon as late as the April 3, 1394, the last day of the solution. Saturn was located at the very cusp of Virgo and Libra in this solution, corresponding to the position of Saturn in the greater zodiac precisely. Saturn has the appearance of a wayfarer with a staff and a crescent on its head, and it walks along the zodiac, right between Virgo and Libra. Jupiter, Mercury, Mars and Venus congregated in the middle of Pisces, which is just where we find them in the greater zodiac. The maximum distance between them did not exceed 10 degrees. Venus, Mars and Mercury have all been at the distance of 2 to 3 degrees from each other. Jupiter only attained morning visibility on March 31. It rose when the Sun had set by 7 degrees in Cairo and 8 degrees in Luxor. The brightness of Jupiter, -1.5, was approximately equal to the brightness of Sirius. This would guarantee its visibility. On the last day included in this solution, April 3, 1394, Jupiter would rise when the solar submersion rate equaled 8.5 degrees in Cairo and 10 degrees in Luxor, which made its visibility even better. However, one could only observe the planet at very early dawn. This might be the reason why we see a man with a circle on his head in the greater zodiac of Esna. It is highlighted green in the zodiac's color version. The circle on the figure's head is large enough, which might refer to the proximity between Jupiter and the Sun, as though the former was carrying the latter on its head. The next after Jupiter, counting from the Sun, is Venus, followed by Mars and Mercury. In the previous days Venus had been behind Mercury and Mars, taking over them on March 25. This may explain the fact that Mars is enclosed between two sitting doubles of Venus in the greater zodiac entirely, one of them large, just like the ones that other planets have got, and the other small. The small double indicates the past position of Venus, when it had been on the other side of Mars, whereas the large one corresponds to the correct position of Venus in relation to other planets on the dates included in the primary horoscope. Mars and Mercury remained at virtually the same longitude between March 31 and April 3, 1394. Their respective order in the zodiac could therefore be indicated in any which way. It happens to be as follows: Jupiter, Venus, Mars and Mercury. Venus, Mars and Mercury rose at the solar submersion rate of 14 degrees at least. All of them were visible very clearly before sunrise and at dawn on the days included in this solution, as well as the ones preceding them. A week before the primary horoscopes interval, on March 25, 1394, all of the three planets, Venus, Mars and Mercury, converged at a single point. The distance between Mercury and both Mars and Venus equaled a mere 5 arc minutes. The brightness of Venus equaled -3.5. The respective values for Mercury and Mars were +0.7 and +1.3. Such great brightness and close proximity would transform all three into a single star of exceptional brightness. The event must have been very spectacular. It could be observed in Cairo before sunrise and at dawn on March 25, 1394. The submersion rate of the Sun when this triple star rose had equaled 14 degrees. It has to be said that the primary horoscope of the greater zodiac from Esna was compiled immediately after this magnificent event. Solution days begin right after the conjunction of the three planets, when Jupiter appeared in the sky on March 31, followed by the birth of the Moon on April 3. This happened a week after the triple conjunction. The 1394 solution precisely matches the primary horoscope of the greater zodiac of Esna. Corollary. The greater zodiac of Esna contains the following date: March 31 to April 3, 1394 AD. It was a new moon. The best correlation with the zodiac was attained on April 3, 1394, when the new moon was born in Taurus and right over the Pleiades.